Great. So I guess before I start, I think the first thing is I need to admit that I am not a mobile telecoms expert. I've been working kind of at the intersection of energy, utilities, emerging markets, and the mobile industry for the last 4 years. And prior to that, I've mostly been focused on infrastructure. So I've spent quite a few years looking at water and sanitation in developing markets, large-scale power generation across the globe. And about 4 years ago, at the place down the road in Oxford, I was having a conversation, or I started a conversation with a friend, and I was looking for a summer internship at the time, it was suggested to me that maybe I should be looking at mobile money for the unbanked, and I said that's interesting, but really, I'm not sure if that's my cup of tea. And an introduction was made, and I was introduced to a fellow called Jesse Moore, who at the time was working for the GSMA, and we got on to talk about access to energy and the challenges that face our globe. And he was about to leave the GSMA to start a small company, and his whole value proposition or idea was really to, one, embed SIMs in small-scale solar-powered devices, and two, enable people to pay for access to those devices via mobile money. And having spent quite a bit of time working across Africa, I thought this idea was great, and that's how I got involved in the sector overall. And over the last 3 years, I've actually been working with the GSMA looking at the intersection of mobile technology and access to utilities. So in terms of kind of what I'll be speaking about today, I'm really going to be taking a much more emerging market perspective. I'm going to do a brief introduction to what we do within the GSMA Mobile for Development group, talk a little bit about both of what we see in terms of the opportunity, but also the challenges that exist in leveraging technology for both socio and economic development. And then I'll be speaking more about the program that I work on, which is really around kind of utility access, both in on and off-grid areas across emerging markets, and then share some insights that we found over the last year as we've been basically running a R&D fund to support startups, NGOs, operators, et cetera, to look at these opportunities. And hopefully as part of that, I'll also be sharing insights in terms of how operators can be participating in this sector. So for those who do not know who we are, the GSMA is the Global Trade Association of GSM mobile operators. We have over 800 mobile operator members and additional 200 to 300 members that are part of the ecosystem, and I'm sure many of you are actually part of our membership. Within that, we also have a department called Mobile for Development. So we exist because we think that there is a great opportunity to leverage mobile technology to support socio and economic development. And in terms of what we work on, I'll go to this first. So in terms of kind of why we think it's important, I think all of us have realized that in terms of technologies and access to communication technologies, especially in emerging markets, mobile is the most ubiquitous one. Penetration is still not 100%, so we're reaching kind of 40% globally. So this is not in terms of GSM population coverage, but this is in terms of actual mobile subscription. But it far outpaces access to tablets, PCs, and smartphones. At the same time, we think that when you compare access to basic services, and I know the color is a little bit faint, but here in the Western world, mobile penetration is upwards of 80%, and access to financial services, electricity, sanitation is also quite high. But what we see in emerging markets, particularly here in sub-Saharan Africa, is that actual access to mobile connectivity, either directly as a subscriber or having access to someone in your home who owns a mobile phone, actually far surpasses financial services, electricity, and sanitation. And so, the statistic we heard this morning, around 6 billion people having access to mobile phones, the reality is, our view personally is that it's actually probably half of that, right? So that usually kind of deals with 2 SIMs per person, per connection. But it's still much greater than the access to the other kinds of services that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. So in terms of what we work on, generally, sorry, I realize these slides have been shifted in terms of the format, so some of the font's going to be off. So there's kind of three main areas that we focus on. So the first is around digital inclusion. So how do we get the next 1 billion people online? The second is around financial inclusion. So once you've created the platform for mobile connectivity, how do you start to leverage that to also provide access to financial services? And the third is really around kind of life-enhancing value-added services. So what other services can you provide to underserved communities once they have access to mobile coverage and mobile phones? In terms of how we work, for kind of each of the programs within the Mobile for Development group within the GSMA kind of goes through three main stages. So the first one is we identify an opportunity, and we actually conduct primary research to better understand what are the challenges that exist around those sectors. So that could be agriculture, that could be health, that could be employment, connectivity, et cetera. Then, the core part of our activity is really around stimulating activity, or kind of working as market facilitators to basically bring different actors together, including our members, as well as third-party innovators, to come together and work on identifying solutions to these problems. And our long-term goal is really looking at scaling for impact. So what that's looked like from a historic perspective is that basically, since 2004, we have kind of slowly been bringing on new programs, but the bulk of our activity really started in 2008. And so in terms of the activities that we support currently is we have a renewable energies program that's focused on kind of looking at solutions for off-grid base stations. Probably our most well-known program is around mobile money for the unbanked. So basically, how do you provide financial services to those that do not have banking services? We have a mobile agriculture program, mobile-enabled community services, which is I'll be speaking about later. Health, we have a gender-focused program that looks at the gender gap in terms of ownership. We have a relatively recent program that looks at mobile for employment. So basically, how can mobiles be used to improve access to employment opportunities? We've got a program that's focused on disaster response. So basically working with our members, as well as other associate members, to say how should the mobile industry react when there is a natural disaster. So an example of this was last year in the Philippines, where my colleagues basically acted as coordinators across different organizations who are looking to work with the operators to restore connectivity after the typhoon. And our last, but definitely not least, is a program that's called Mobile for Development Impact. And we, in this program, basically tried to create a data platform to share research, insights, as well as some free data from our GSMA, so our GSMA intelligence system that could be used by different organizations for, as they develop their ideas. So, taking the South Pacific as an example, since 2005, we've seen extreme amount of growth in terms of mobile for development services overall. So while this is great, it's great to see that people are really interested in this. There are still, significant challenges in rolling out these services. Looking more specifically at mobile money services, which, as I said earlier, is one of the more developed ones. Again, we see, a very strong increase in terms of the number of services that are being rolled out globally. But, we need to look a little bit deeper to better understand the difference between kind of the number of people who are subscribed to these services versus those that are actually using them. So the fainter color circles represent kind of total subscribers, and the darker colored circles represent active subscribers, right? So, there's still quite a big difference that exists between kind of potential and actual usage. And so, the thing to kind of consider is that, if this is happening in mobile money services, what else does this look like for agriculture services, health services, etc. So this is kind of just a reality that we face. So specifically to kind of what I work on, so I basically work on a program that, sorry about the slides here, but basically, we've identified the opportunity for mobile to improve access to basic utility services. So that's both access to energy and water, whether that's on-grid or off-grid. Our program is actually a UK government-funded program and includes a £2.4 million research and development innovation fund to support kind of early trials in the sector. Other things that we do is we participate in knowledge sharing events like this and convening events. We provide advisory services to our mobile operator members to help them better understand what they can and cannot do in this sector. And we also work with other donors and impact investors so that they can see kind of what they can do in the sector overall. In terms of how we view the opportunity for mobile to impact these services, we basically consider 5 main channels. One that we've been speaking about a lot already today is around mobile machine-to-machine connectivity. So basically, what can you do once you embed a SIM into a device and put it into an off-grid area, right? So you can do remote monitoring and remote control. The second is around mobile payments, so how kind of the uptake of mobile financial services can support both providing consumer financing to end users, as well as allow people to pay in micropayments, so small amounts of payments that match their income. Third, and quite basic, is mobile services, so how voice, SMS, and data applications can be used to improve the efficiency and overall operations of both entrepreneurs and governments in trying to roll out these services. The fourth is around mobile infrastructure, so we have a kind of a set of business models that we're considering that basically look how mobile towers can be used as anchor tenants for off-grid energy service companies that are trying to kind of, to be present and create a business both serving the telecom and off-grid communities. And the fifth, but definitely not least, is really looking at kind of last mile distribution, right? So mobile operators, particularly in rural areas, have one of the strongest distribution networks, right? They need to be able to provide airtime to their customers in far off areas. So how can you use those agent networks to also provide other services? So in terms of, we got this in duplicate. So in terms of how we see the opportunity, and these slides didn't come out too well, but basically, we did an exercise to basically try to understand how much of the world's population that doesn't have access to energy or water actually has access to the GSM network, right? So that means that they live in the presence of the GSM network. So globally, we've got 1.2 billion people that lack access to energy, but 643 million of these people actually live with GSM coverage. And similarly, on the water access side, 780 million people currently lack access to clean water, but 262 million of those people actually have access to the GSM coverage. So this is kind of what we consider as the current addressable market and market opportunity. And on the right, you'll see that divided by region. One thing to consider is that we expect both these inner circles to grow as coverage increases, but we also expect to see these outer circles grow as well, right? So as urban centers that are electrified are increasingly stressed, where demands for both access to energy and water increase, we expect that there will be more and more people that are going to be suffering from poor access to services overall. So in terms of what we do, in terms of the program and why we exist, generally we think that there's this great market opportunity, but for whatever reason, there's not that many organizations actually trialing products and services. And one of our main reasons why we think that this is happening is that there's very few people out there to provide the risk capital for people to trial these services. And so, many of you who kind of work in the startup world will be very familiar with this great valley of death, which is basically, the large amount of money and time that you need to invest into a product or service before you start to reach break even and actually make profits. Okay, so this one's also a little bit a mess. Okay, sorry. So in terms of how we look at this, basically, is we think that there's a virtuous circle between champions who are actually trialing services and creating the evidence for people to kind of uptake and deliver more services. And as part of that, there are kind of three main elements that we feel are important to support kind of this ecosystem. The first is funding, which is our R&D grant service. The second is monitoring and evaluation activities. So how do we actually extract learnings and information from those early trials to create the body of evidence that will enable champions to basically trial more services. So the main reason that the UK government and DIF in particular are interested in our program is really around creating this body of evidence, right? So they themselves see the opportunity for the mobile industry to play a positive role in improving access to these services, but they really want to see the evidence that the private sector can be involved in supporting this arrangement. So next what I'm going to be speaking about is the lessons basically that we've learned from running this R&D grant process. So in January of last year, we got the okay from the UK government that we would be get the funding for the program. And in July and again in September, we ran 2 rounds of this grant process. Overall, we received 187 concept notes, 167 that we consider unique. And they're spread a lot across the globe. But from those 167 concept notes, we dwindled that pack down to 46 applications. In the end, gave out 13 grants. And the colors basically represent kind of the sectors that were represented. So in green, that's energy. The dark blue is water. And the kind of this aqua color is a mixture of energy and water applications. So an example of that could be an irrigation application, right, which is really an energy service, but also brings together a water component. And the results, I think, first and foremost, talk about the maturity of the energy sector and their kind of thinking around the mobile industry. So in the end, we provided kind of 77% of our grants to energy related organizations and less than 25% to water related organizations. Other key trends that we saw were particularly around mobile partnerships, and I'll get a bit more into that. So in the end, again, these 77, which are actually all the energy grants, had partnerships with mobile operators. There was a strong interest in using machine-to-machine connectivity, so basically how to do the remote monitoring and the remote control. A strong interest in using mobile payments and particularly mobile money. And that, we did see quite a difference in terms of the maturity between the energy and water sector. So from a global perspective, what that looks like is that we basically have grants ranging from over here to Cambodia all the way to here in Guinea-Conakry. And, they're a mixture of partnerships. Some of them are startups working on their own. Some of them are driven directly from mobile operators. Most are from kind of a partnership between the operator and the innovator, and the strength of that partnership, differs quite significantly. A couple of examples that we have here. The first one is from Telenor EasyPesa, where they received one of our seed grants. And they're basically trialing the development of a consumer finance product using Islamic financing principles to provide access to solar-powered products. A second one is actually from Portland State University, from their Sweet Sense lab. And they're working in partnership with an NGO called Living Water International in Rwanda, as well as the government, the local government, to basically put in 200 machine-to-machine sensors in hand pumps, so rural water hand pumps. And a statistic that you may not know of is that currently kind of 1 in 3 hand pumps in sub-Saharan Africa is non-functional. So even though it's installed and those people are considered to have access to clean water, those hand pumps are not in operation. And right here is an example of that sensor. And to be honest, it's just a little bit bigger than than this little black box that I'm holding. So apart from that, there's kind of 4 major insights that I'd like to share from the analysis of this pipeline. So we went through a rather in-depth process of analyzing those 167 concept notes, both in terms of kind of what they were looking at, in terms of the partnerships that they were proposing, as well as kind of their business models. The first is really around regional spread. So on the right, you'll see the regional spread across from Africa to Latin America. In general, the most activity that we did receive was from sub-Saharan Africa. But when you actually look at a country-to-country basis, India was the most active, where we received a total of 39 concept notes. Something else that was quite interesting was that, although the fund was not geared towards the Latin America region, we still received a total of 7 concept notes from the region, suggesting that there is interest in using kind of mobile for access to these basic services. And we're currently in conversations with the Inter-American Development Bank to see how we can develop a program to target that region overall. The second insight was really around the mobile channels, and looking at kind of the use of those channels across the different sectors, so that energy, water, energy plus water, mobile services, so basic applications, voice, SMS, etc., was by far the most popular, but closely followed by mobile payments and machine-to-machine technology. And I think something that's important to highlight in kind of the sectors that we look at is that although the use of M2M can be quite expensive, as was previously stated, and often requires access to an energy source, most of these applications of M2M were actually proposed because they're providing a level of value that can be maintained through the business model, right? So it's either tied to also providing an energy source, or related to the fact that the value kind of derived from the idea is much better than the current situation. And an example of that could be around non-technical losses for utilities. So currently, non-technical losses for both water and energy utilities in emerging markets are over between 40 and 60%. So this is money that the utility cannot be billing for. Yeah. The third insight is really around kind of the lead organization in terms of who was applying for the funds. Put simply, from an energy side, there was many more kind of business-minded and startup organizations that applied for the funding, whereas on the water side, we saw a mixture of kind of NGOs, academics, and also kind of technical service providers that were applying. And one of the things that we think needs to be strengthened is the role of the service provider, i.e. who is actually providing the service to the end customer in the water sector to kind of better address the situation. I just got the 3-minute mark, so I'm going to speed up here. Coming again, to this issue is, we definitely saw a mixture of issues and different organizations looking at the issues around energy and water access, both in the rural and the urban space. Put simply, in rural areas, you often don't have another alternative, whereas in urban areas, you often do have an alternative, i.e. a pipe network, an electricity network, etc., but that it's often unreliable. And so kind of the use cases to use mobile to improve these services vary significantly. And I'll skip through this, but this is kind of just an example of what that looks like in urban environments. And then last but not least, we saw an actual pretty broad range in terms of how operators were partnering with organizations. And we grouped this across kind of a cooperative approach, a collaborative approach, or a co-creative approach, where kind of, at the extreme right requires a high level of engagement between the operators and the innovators, whereas, in a cooperative space where you're just sharing information or providing basic connectivity, innovators can have a very light touch engagement and MOU with the operators. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any questions, here are my details, and I'll also be staying around for the rest of the night to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie.